That was talking, under my solvency point, I cited the American Physical Society report. And actually people look at the NRC report, the 300-page study, and say, it's not right because of the American Physical Society. Look at those results. Unfortunately, the American Physical Society says the NRC is right.
Okay, so on the solvency of 2 slow, did you read any evidence specifically that the railgun counters this speed?
Well, we have the evidence talking about the speed of the railgun, 5,600 miles per hour.
Right, but did you read any evidence specific that the railgun specifically counters this problem?
Absolutely,
comparing the railgun speed specifically to the speed of the ICBM.
It didn't give specific speeds, but the Navy Department of the postgraduate school said that in order to actually hit the missile in that time, you would have to use either a laser or a railgun.
Okay, but not specifically comparing the speeds. So turn out disadvantage.
Obviously they did. They're the Department of Physics.
All right, well we'll be discussing that. The disadvantage of debris. A couple questions here. One, your evidence was generic about the warhead falling, correct? It didn't specifically mention China.
It did, but look at the ballistic trajectories. I actually have those. There's the shortfall problem. Look, there's the missile going over China.
Okay.
And if it doesn't, it goes over Russia, which is also pretty bad for us.
Okay,
so there's that piece of evidence, and that piece of evidence, and that piece of evidence.
Actually, I'll take that evidence. Thank you.
Could I have some?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Which one?
Okay, this one,
that one.
this one.
Those ones are the ones I need.
And this one.
And this one. There you go. Thanks. Now, do you actually read the evidence that they have to go over China, or was that simply an example of a trajectory?
That is how it would go. Basically, if North Korea wants to strike as fast as possible, that's when they're going to have the ICBM that's most capable.
Okay, but the evidence didn't say they have to. Simply an example of a trajectory, right?
It has to. In order, basically, until they develop an ICBM that goes farther and can go east over the coast, they're not going to wait for a faster ICBM.
All right, thanks.
Right, please stop. Affirmative prep time? Or negative prep time? I suppose affirmative was already stopped.
Well, if everyone's ready to begin, let's get started. They were faced with an alien armada. It seemed that nothing could stop them. But unfortunately for them, Stargate Atlantis had the assistance of Stargate Command. Now, what did Stargate Command use to defend against this alien armada? That's right, railguns. Railguns are no longer sci-fi technology. In fact, they're quite real. Mike Hoffman, former intelligence officer for the United States Air Force, January of 2013. Quote, the Navy has spent the past 8 years testing railguns, most notably rolling out the first weaponized railgun in January of 2012. We certainly have the railgun. Now, let's actually get into their argument. They cited a piece of evidence talking about how basically it wouldn't be ready until 2017. They're talking about 2 different types of railguns. There's an idea to make the railgun even better, it's kind of a different kind of railgun used for different purposes in the long term. But we already have this railgun already. Now this is from Richard D. Fisher. Again, we've already cited him, both teams have cited him multiple times, September of 2012. Quote, at this point, accelerated development and deployment of the shorter-range Blitzer is not a U.S. funding priority, though it should be. Instead, the United States Navy's priority is on achieving the science breakthroughs needed to build a more capable railgun that could accelerate its round up to Mach 7. Though the early versions may achieve ranges of 92 to 185 kilometers and a firing rate of 10 rounds per minute. That's our railgun. This more advanced railgun may not be ready for production until the mid-2020s. Early development and deployment of railguns could be useful in deterring or defeating missile threats posed by North Korea. This evidence is saying that we do have railguns, though they are pursuing this more advanced form, which is what their evidence is talking about. We certainly do have railguns. We have a former intelligence officer for the Air Force saying they already exist. There's no way in which they can't exist because unless this person is flat out lying, which is just, in my opinion, ridiculous. So let's get into some of their other arguments. They also talk about their counterplan disadvantage, about Chinese aggression. First of all, no impact. They never cited any impacts as to what this would actually cause. What would be the real repercussions? Would China shake their fists? Would they do anything? They can't do anything. If they attack our economy, they go down as well, which was true according to the affirmative team, as I asked in cross-examination. The second factor is Chinese calculus. What is China's calculus? Is China more worried about the United States having a missile defense in a general area that is relatively close to them? Or are they more worried about a North Korean strike on the United States? As the affirmative team said, if North Korea strikes the United States, China will go down. Now, China knows that the United States isn't going to use these railguns against China. China and the United States have been around for a long time. China understands that the United States is a rational actor, no matter how complicated their relationship is. Third is their evidence is talking about Taiwan. Their evidence is talking about defending Taiwan against China. It's not specific to defending South Korea and the United States from North Korea. That's why it says 10 railguns instead of 5 railguns. It's a different plan. Let's move on to their arguments about topical counterplans. I have 4 responses here. First of all, is this not against the rules? The rules actually were relatively recently changed, I believe, so they could allow for topical counterplans. It says that the affirmative team must uphold the resolution. It says the negative team must simply go against the affirmative team, not against the resolution. So what it's saying is basically the resolution allows for you to choose a case and then go for that case, and then you are basically going against that case instead of the entire resolution. They're not upholding the entire resolution, otherwise they would be upholding our plan as well. Obviously, they're only upholding one part of the resolution, so we're only going against that part. Second of all, they use the analogy of Congress. They said it's like Congress. I would relatively agree. That's the concept. It's like a Congress. Many debaters agree on this concept. Does Congress just say, is this a good idea, or should we have a defense against this thing? No, they say, what kind of defense should we have? That's actually something that Congress gets into. Now, they may not get into specific detailed technologies, the congressmen themselves, but railguns is a different concept than than a boost-phase missile defense. Now, they also talked about the issue of there being no countermeasures by North Korea. I want to first point out that basically they would then have a failed system whatsoever. North Korea wouldn't be able to strike the United States ever. Obviously, North Korea would be able to develop this technology probably by 2016, and then they could get by. It doesn't undermine the counterplan because railguns can get off 80 shots, whereas they can only get off a few, so we can strike the decoys as well. Thank you so much.
Hey, can I get the piece of evidence about the different railguns? I think you're interested.
Yes. Actually, this one.
Okay.
Well, I read one that's saying that they exist, the other one's talking about the different kinds.
Okay, thanks. Oh, also, could I get the evidence back on my dissent in China?
Yes. Hey, Grace, real quick, if you read the grayed out part, you can understand.
Prep time to use.
3 minutes.
What is that? Thanks.
Alright, if my judges are ready, timer, negative team. We must deploy the boost phase defense so we can defend against North Korea. Let's go into the arguments of the negative team, starting off with Josiah's Solomon defense. Solomon 25 about how the interceptors are too slow. My response is that we have enough time. We have enough time. I'm going to read a couple pieces of evidence from Lauren Thompson, PhD in government, and quote, the Missile Defense Agency describes boost phase as the ideal time to intercept ballistic missiles. Let's go to another piece of evidence from the Daily World, Washington newspaper, February 13, 2013. Quote, North Korean technology makes it unlikely they will develop rockets fast enough to overcome boost phase for perhaps decades, end quote. Now those are two pieces of evidence talking about how the interceptors in boost phase are fast enough to intercept the North Korean missiles before they leave the boost phase. Let's move down to the solvency point 6 about how we can't protect the mainland because the interceptors, because the missiles will be traveling in a different direction than we say. I have two responses. My first response is that we intercept it before it starts going on its course, before it leaves the atmosphere. So even though the missiles will be traveling in a different direction, perhaps we intercept it before it starts going on that direction, so it's completely irrelevant. But my second response is that even if it did go in that direction, our drones are mobile, so they will be able to move to intercept it once it moved in that direction. Let's go into the disadvantage one that they ran, about nuclear debris. I have one response to the overall disadvantage, then three responses to the impact. My first response is that the missile is destroyed. When we intercept a missile, it is completely destroyed. From Dean Milkening, PhD in physics from Harvard. Quote, boost phase ballistic missile defense is alluring because the entire payload, single or multiple warheads, may be destroyed in a single shot, end quote. Now that means that when we intercept a missile, it will be completely gone, completely destroyed, meaning that no debris will be able to fall into China. Then this also means that the detonation device is destroyed, so it can't detonate either. Let's go to the impact about how there will be nuclear detonation in China. My first response is that the missile is not intact, so it can't hurt China at all. The missile is completely destroyed. But my second response is that this is just an example. The negative team's evidence didn't actually say that it would fall on China. It said it could. It was an example of it. But my third response is that it would fall into the Sea of Japan. So it would, just because of the geography, the Sea of Japan is in front of North Korea, so the missile would fall forward and fall into the Sea of Japan if it did stay intact, which it won't. Let's move into the counter plan and the theory of the counter plan. First off, they dropped that that counter plan is not competitive and does not clash with the Argentines case, meaning that it could be done at the same time. Therefore, they accept that their counter plan is not legitimate to be run in the debate round. Let's go into how it's top below. They said that it's not against the rules in the real world. My response is that the affirmative team is the resolution. We encompass the resolution. If they have to negate the affirmative team, by negating the affirmative team, they must negate the resolution. My second response is about how, their second response is about real world. My response is that the Congress discusses one thing at a time. So we do have this kind of system in the real world anyway. It's a system like topicality in the real world. My second response is the rules over real world. The negative team must uphold the rules of debate and the structure of debate before they look at how it is done in the real world. Let's move on to the solvency point against the counterclaim about how we don't have railguns. They said that we do have railguns. My response is that they haven't proven the capabilities to be able to shoot down an ICBM by North Korea by 2016. They have not proven the specifics and that the railguns will have that capability. The evidence from the negative team said that the railguns need further improvement. That was the evidence from the own negative team. Let's go into the disadvantage about how there will be Chinese aggression. They said, first off, there's no impact. My response is of escalation. There are obviously tensions between China and the United States, so there will be an escalation of the tensions between China and the United States. That is the impact. The second response is of what is the calculus of China. Our response is that our plan defends the United States. That's what China wants. The United States and China are allies in trade and in other areas. So our plan defends the United States. That's what China wants. The negative team's counter plan goes against China and it hurts China. Their third response is about how the evidence was about Taiwan. My response is that the evidence didn't say Taiwan at all. The evidence was one sentence, and Grayson read the whole sentence. It didn't mention Taiwan. It was only talking about China. Let's go into the solvency point 3 about whether or not North Korea can deploy countermeasures in this phase. They said pretty much that it would be pretty silly if North Korea wouldn't be able to deploy the countermeasures in this phase. My response is no evidence that they could, Now my partner in his speech brought up a piece of evidence saying that North Korea cannot deploy countermeasures during boost phase. And the negative team just came back and said, well, it would be silly if they couldn't. They read no evidence, and they said no reasons as to why they would be able to deploy them. So once you look at the two plans, firstly, the negative team's plan is not legitimate to be run around. But secondly, there is no solvency for the plan because the railguns do not exist, and they will not be able to defend against North Korea. But the affirmative team's plan has been proven successful, and it will be able to defend the United States against North Korea. So I'd ask you to vote for the affirmative team's counterclaim, for the affirmative team's plan. Thank you.
That's everything.
4 minutes.
Can I have evidence back?
Yes. I will find it. Yeah. There you go. And these ones.
Could you let me know when you have roughly 30 seconds per minute left?
The Blitzer railgun fires projectiles faster and farther than any weapon known to man. Admiral Matthew Plunder, February 28, 2012. The railgun is the only defense system that has been proven to work against North Korean intercontinental ballistic missiles as identified by Richard D. Fisher and the Department of Physics at the Navy Postgraduate School. Let me just reread this to you. The only current technologies which may be able to meet the 100-second engagement time are the airborne laser and the electromagnetic railgun. The only current available technologies. If Congress was really debating this and deciding the best available technology, what would they choose? Railguns, not drones. We're going to be looking at how the affirmative team plan fails on every count in my two voting issues. Voting issue number 1 is bees versus Blitzer. Again, bees versus Blitzer. All the affirmative team does is establish a missile defense that is ineffective and produces absolutely no advantages, much like a drone. We'll be looking at this under 5 points. First of all, my first point is it's too slow. It's too slow. Now, she read a PhD under her response of enough time, but she had a PhD in government. I cited a very heavily scrutinized report and peer-reviewed report from the American Physical Society, the largest group of international physicists working in the United States. Obviously far more credible than this. And also it's talking specifically about a North Korean ICBM. It says that North Korea is likely, unfortunately for us, the type of missile in question is the type of missile that North Korea is likely to have by the time a boost phase missile defense system is up and running. This is specifically talking about North Korean intercontinental ballistic missile. The affirmative team's plan is too slow. The railguns are too fast. The second point under this is and also they read a piece of evidence talking about the Missile Defense Agency. Missile Defense Agency apparently rigged our GMD tests. How can we trust the Missile Defense Agency to tell us that the boost phase system actually works? My second point under this is the route restricts. Again, the routes restrict. Now they said basically the drones will be able to go after it. However, the piece of evidence I read specifically said a boost-based intercept might be workable if the threat is a North Korean long-range missile headed towards U.S. bases in the Western Pacific, therefore flying over the Sea of Japan, where they station their interceptors. The interceptors are not fast enough to get up north when they're stationed in the South Sea of Japan. It's simply not fast enough, and the 300-page congressionally mandated scientific report confirms this. Let's look at my other response, which is the routes are real. They talk about how these routes are only theoretical. However, I have 4 scientific studies talking about how all of these routes are north and not east. The only eastern route is specific to Hawaii and Guam. That's the best the affirmative team can give you if they actually work. Let's look at my other response, which is it's in the atmosphere. Basically, the booster doesn't just go straight up. It goes like this as it goes. It doesn't just go straight up. And then it gets into space. While it's in that period, it's still going north. Let's look at my third point under this, is legitimate counterplan. Again, legitimate counterplan. Now, Michaela actually dropped, she said rules before railguns or something like that. However, she dropped my partner's response that the rules were basically amended, allowing the negative team, the only way for the way for the negative team to win is refuting the affirmative team. What are we doing? Refuting the affirmative team. It used to say what they would like it to believe it said. Unfortunately, it does not anymore, and they dropped this response. So the rules say that you can vote for the counterplan. Second point under this is clear clash. She said there's no clash. There's obviously clash here. The railguns provide an effective defense and do not result in a nuclear detonation on Chinese soil. The affirmative team's plan does. Clearly clashes. My second response is they're not upholding the entire resolution. If they were upholding the entire resolution, they would still be basically advocating railguns and cutting aid to Egypt and all kinds of cases that they're not actually arguing. Also, they said how Congress discusses one thing at a time. According to them, Congress discusses the concept of missile defense. What technologies work, what do not. The affirmative teams contradicted themselves. My fourth point under this is the railgun is ready. They said, well, our evidence said that the railgun still needs development. That was talking about the more capable railgun that will be ready in 2020. And then it made the distinction that the Blitzer railgun is ready now. And evidence read in the 1NC talking about the capabilities of the Blitzer railgun, as well as the Department of Physics at the Navy Postgraduate School confirmed this. Let's also look at why the China point doesn't exist. You can look at, I actually read the entire report about Taiwan. It's specifically talking about if we were to do this against Taiwan. Would the People's Liberation Army contemplate launching missiles if it knew Taiwan could launch to 48,000 steel shotguns? And it talks about railguns in that study. So it's talking about defending Taiwan because they didn't cut the evidence where it said Taiwan. That doesn't matter. Voting issue number 2 is nuclear disaster. First point under this is it's intact. Look at the evidence. The booster will remain intact. They only target the warhead remains intact. They only target the booster because that's the only thing they're hitting. The railgun shreds the missile altogether, and the nuclear detonation will be on Chinese soil. If you want to save millions of lives, and vote for the best available technology, vote for the only system proven and fast enough. Thank you.
All right, judges, ready? And time? Thank you, speakers. Here we go. The United States has the ability to defend itself from long-range nuclear-armed ballistic missiles if it builds the right system defenses based on stealthy drones that can shoot down ballistic missiles and power flight. Theodore Postel at the MIT. Clearly, at the end of the debate round, I'm going to prove that actually the evidence sides with the affirmative team, and that even if it's sided with the negative team, the negative ballot isn't warranted because the counterplan isn't legitimate. Let's turn to their voting issues. The voting issue 1 was that of B versus Blitzer. They have a couple sub-points in here. First of all, they said that the boost phase is too slow. They said that all we quoted was a PhD in the Missile Defense Agency, and the Missile Defense Agency isn't credible because they rigged the test. My response is Missile Defense Agency and advice. Missile Defense Agency advice. Now, the advice from Missile Defense Agency in a study of missile defense we could deploy is different than the testing of our current missile defense. The Missile Defense Agency actually said that boost phase, based on a study they did, is the best time to do the interception of the ballistic missile. My second response is that the plan will be, boost phase will be up and running within 2 years. What the negative team hasn't proven is that they can actually build the railguns before 2016. Michaela made this argument in the last speech that the negative team hasn't proven the capability by 2016, whereas we, the affirmative team, have. The plan of boost phase will only take about 1.5 years to put in place. So even if the negative team's technology is ready right now, they haven't proven that they can actually deploy it in time. Secondly, their subpoint B was that of the route. They said that they are actually going to be traveling upward the missile so we can't actually strike it. 2 responses. First of all, we have intel. Obviously, when a country were to launch a ballistic missile, we would have intel beforehand, and as Michaela said, we can move our drones accordingly in order to suit that. My second response is that it's in the boost phase. It's in the boost phase. Now, the negative team said that for some reason it's going to be traveling super fast diagonally. However, the boost phase is slow. The missiles are traveling slow in the boost phase, and it is generally on an upward trajectory, regardless of which path it's going to head toward. It's on an upward trajectory for the boost phase. The third subpoint was that of legit counterclaim. They said, first of all, in the topicality, they said that the rules would change. However, Michaela's argument actually does fit in the current rules. Essentially, the argument is that the affirmative plan, the affirmative team, embodies the resolution. By arguing against the affirmative team, the negative team is arguing against the affirmative because the affirmative team is the resolution. That's what the affirmative ballot means. The negative team, by doing the plan to uphold the resolution, proves the affirmative ballot true. They secondly said that there is clash with the two plans. First of all, they didn't respond to this in the 2NC or the 1NR. They needed to. They had 13 minutes of argumentation to respond to my argument. They didn't. In debate, silent is acceptance. If you're silent on an issue, then you accept the legitimacy of the issue. The counterplan is not legitimate in the debate round, given it isn't a reason why the plan is a bad idea. It's not an opportunity cost. That's what a counterplan has to be, but it's not. Moving down to the subpoint D of the railgun is ready. Again, their evidence that actually mentioned that we have one deployed right now, it specifically said that the Navy needs to do more investment. The evidence specifically said that. They haven't proven the railgun is able to defend against North Korea in time. The second voting issue, and actually under the issue of the Chinese disadvantage, they said that it was about Taiwan, and that part of the study talked about Taiwan. Well, that's great, but the quote I had that said that just 10 blitzers would totally destroy their army. The negative counterplan does 5, so under the negative counterplan, we deploy 5 blitzers to destroy China's army. That could destroy China's army. This increases the escalation of our conflict with China and actually increases the likelihood of a war breaking out between the United States and China. The plan of the affirmative avoids that because our drones can't destroy China's army. Finally, before we get to the voting issue 2, they said under their argument about how only the railguns can actually get the ballistic missiles in the boost phase and that the boost phase is actually too short, my response is that it assumes a faster ICBM. It assumes a faster ICBM. Now, the evidence McKellar read in the last speech specifically said from Theodore Postal that North Korea specifically North Korea cannot build a missile fast enough to beat boost phase for perhaps decades. North Korea cannot build a missile fast enough to beat the affirmative plan for perhaps decades. So maybe in a couple decades our plans will work. Sure. But we defend the United States right now. Even if we're not defending decades in the future, we defend the United States right now. The affirmative plan has the best missile defense. Finally, under the disadvantage of debris on the voting issue 2, all they said was that the nuclear warhead stays intact. However, the negative evidence said if it is simply broken up on impact. But our evidence said that the warhead is destroyed, meaning it's not broken up on impact. So the plan of the affirmative totally destroys the warhead, prevents any debris from happening. At the end of the round, what do you have? You have a counterplan that is illegitimate, a counterplan that simply, according to the protocol of debate, you shouldn't be voting for because it actually doesn't clash with the affirmative plan. At the end of the round, you have a proven affirmative plan. We have proven that we can deploy it in time. We can deploy it fast enough to defend the United States, and the scientists actually side with the affirmative side here. The Missile Defense Agency advises boost phase defense. At the end of the round, the affirmative plan defends the United States against North Korea, avoids the disadvantage of aggression with China, and at the end of the round is going to be the most beneficial for saving the most lives. Vote for the affirmative team because we uphold the protocol of debate and save the most lives in a net beneficial standpoint. Thank you.
Thank you very much for judging.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for judging.
Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for your time.